Hello there, and welcome to Tabletop Tidbits, the place where we just sit down, you and me, and have a chat. And my voice is still hurting from a while ago from doing some very heavy voiceover work, so let's sit down and talk for an extended period of time. Hopefully, a bit shorter than the previous time, because that was 1 hour 47 minutes of a video, but it was a good time to sit down and just talk about design in general. This time, while I was talking about design, my thoughts on design, like how my design process has been throughout all this kind of stuff, I thought I'd focus in on a more central topic, and that is classes. And more specifically, we'll be discussing whether classes are a good thing or a bad thing, and whether or not we can bring the Ranger back to life. And by that I mean that the Ranger has had a pretty negative reception. Like, even 5e, since it began, the first version, no one liked, and it's been memed to death. How many shorts have there been about how terrible the Ranger is? I've even done one. And then also in the new version, people were like, oh my god, are they gonna fix the Ranger? Then they saw the other changes to the classes that they made and they thought, okay, hope isn't high, but they had a go. They tried to make it more inherently magical than like a survival boy, and both versions they don't like. And that's because my express opinion that I'm going to state now, and I've said to a bunch of people that I've met in person, and the reason I think that the Ranger has such a hard time is specifically because no one knows what a Ranger is. Like, what do we have to draw upon to really say this is a Ranger? You know what I mean? Like, okay, read into what the Ranger is. It's a survivalist. Okay? So, in a game with smites, sneak attack, all these combat stuff, how are you going to implement an effective fighter in a combat fantasy game and give it a survivalist feel without it feeling like it's splitting its sights too far? So, and I think a big part of that is a lack of a central fantasy. And we'll cover that now. I'll get back to the Ranger in a sec, but first I thought I'd talk about classes in general. So, again, are they good or are they bad? Good question. Well, if I was to sort of off the top of my head ask this, I'll probably say, okay, classes, they are good and bad, because depending on what sort of person you are, you'll either absolutely love them or not be a fan as much. Purely because when you ask, do you like classes, it's a question of, do you like this direct central tree that gives you all the skills as you get higher up it or lower down to the roots, however you want to view it. And there are some branches that could come off it, whether it's in D&D, feats and subclasses, that kind of thing. If it's, what's it called? This Shadow of the Demon Lord. There we go. If it's Shadow of the Demon Lord, there's a couple of more branches that you can take. Of course, there's your ancestry or your species or your race or whatever you want to call it, that also connects to your character and maybe intersect with some abilities. Maybe it causes a bit of divergence, but who knows? But the main focus of a class is, of course, yes, it allows you to have a central tree, but that benefit is that, well, if there's a central sort of idea of what the class is, you can imprint onto it. If you have a game that's more open, for example, let's call it Call of Cthulhu, for example, or a game where there's no classes. I know they have professions in that, but Call of Cthulhu, there's no classes. What else do we have? Cyborg? No, those have classes. Yeah, so the games where you don't have classes of any kind. There's a lot of them out there. For some reason, my brain's drawing the fattest of blanks. But, yeah, whenever you don't have a game that has classes, they're good games. They're really fun to play, but do people feel like they can imprint upon the idea of this class? Some people have a core class they really like. I have a friend that has played so many clerics that it's almost become a joke, and his unofficial aim, is to play every single class's subclasses. And when they brought out new subclasses and they changed how the rules work in 5e, his mission was reset to 0. So, people have a core class, they like the classes. Some people love to play barbarians. I know people have played very similar characters throughout every single game because they like the feel of the rogue, the paladin, the barbarian, that kind of thing. And this isn't unique to D&D or any game that is fantasy-wise. This happens in sci-fi too. Something like Starfinder, Mothership. Some people will find what they like to sort of hone in on more and focus on that. And also, another benefit, which it almost feels like a risk in saying this now, because I feel like this is a thing that pulls up the veil on a lot of things, and that is, at least online, if you look at someone like like one-shot questers, for example, who's basically made a career online just doing memes about the D&D classes for years at this point, ever since lockdown. Like a lot of D&D creators who capitalized on lockdown. Oh, that sounds bad. I won't clarify. So, yeah, like the whole focus on classes, you can make a lot of focus on these classes and give them a personality. The barbarian is a big lumbering idiot. The paladin is a devout and also quite prude person. The bard is just a horny boy, as we all know. And these things carry over, and it almost becomes memes that people take seriously. Like, some people do go like, well, the bard's like a horny charisma boy, and the paladin is supposed to be devout, and people start to cause problems because of this. They think the paladin is a devout follower, which isn't down to memes. That's been a thing for ages. Ever since the paladins come out, people have always been like, oh, I'm supposed to follow my oath? Okay then, at the expense of my party? Even better. But, as I say, people can imprint upon it. They can give it a personality. They can associate with it. This game that they start to bring into their own personality, like D&D or other games like that, they can start to think, okay, not only is the game, I can sort of like, I'm a D&D player, I'm a DM, which they like to sort of relate to people with. They also have something like a class, which they say, I focus and I love the idea, and I almost sort of share personality traits with a framework, which is just a class. I am big and strong, or I like to be big and strong, so therefore I pick a barbarian. I like fighters, like human fighters. They seem appealing to me, despite everyone's objection towards that and calling it boring. I don't. I love that. I love human fighters. I'm going to play one as much as I can. So that's the benefit of classes. You can imprint upon them. And the other benefit, of course, is that as much as people want to disagree, and you can make it so they are much more complex than they need to be, they are kind of simple. They're simple to follow because they give you a simple framework. They give you a direct framework. If you look at something like Pathfinder, for example, that game gives you a class. Very rarely, within the actual base class itself, gives you like anything akin to a subclass. I think the closest you get is something like the Barbarian, which can choose their like instincts, and it gives you a few directions of how you've got your origin of it, like your instinct, this feral instinct that you have. Some of them's like related to dragons and giants, that kind of thing. Some are bestial, as expected, and that gives it a central focus. And you might think Pathfinder's not simple. You might think D&D's not simple. You might think all these other games aren't simple, but giving you a direct, when I level up, this is going to happen, or at this level, I will have this ability, it allows it to be more simple, and also allows for balance to happen a lot more carefully, because if balance can be balanced against the levels of a class, what they have at that level of that class, then you can measure the rest of the abilities of the enemies and what they can do to sort of match and, you know, be a fair fight with the heroes. So, simplicity, and you can sort of relate to the class, which is both great for design and wanting people to like your game. So, there's that. And this is something I've bore in mind throughout my design journey. Sanctum doesn't have classes. Why would I do that, considering I've just talked about all the benefits of classes? Well, another thing that people say is because a class is a central fantasy. It's a single tree that you follow. That can also mean that it's one track. It's one line. And of course, you might say, well, no. If you choose a different ancestry, different species, different feats, your abilities are different, you've rolled different stats, you've chose a different subclass. These things kind of diverge and make a different character. So if you're playing two different games for the same class, they can be completely different characters, especially if they have different DMs and they give you different items, they play differently. You can have a completely different experience. That is 100% true. But people then will still say that it gives you just one track to follow. You're too limited. Even if you have something like D&D, where it gives you like the one track, if you look at the classes, if you look down, if it's something like the Rogue, for example, it feels like there's very little chance for divergence, because you don't get much choices for spells. You get your feats, as I've said, like the Fighter, but most of the time you get abilities that are like based on the root of the class, which is sneaking, stabbing, and being a rogue. And yeah, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm saying that it is more direct. Meanwhile, classless systems, like Call of Cthulhu, you can play anyone. Any profession, anyone in the 1920s. You play something like Dragonbane, which the professions, are they classes? They don't really level up. You get one in the beginning, with like one ability at the beginning, which is your profession. So is that class? Who knows? In that game, you can start leveling up and picking all the heroic abilities, which let you pick and choose what you want to be. And this is probably the difference that people have with D&D and Pathfinder, is that people love that in Pathfinder you can choose a class, and you don't pick a subclass. As I've kind of said, there's very little opportunity for that, but you don't need to, because while it's a class-based system, it almost intersects between classless, where you can just go wild with the choices, pick any features, heroic abilities, anything you want, put your stats and increase them however you like. If you have something like Pathfinder, you can choose the feats, and they basically make it so that you can, if you want to, customize the character and just make a completely different one, because each level up, you're basically going to get some kind of feat, or at least some, like, coming from your ancestry or your class, you're going to get some kind of feat or some kind, so it's going to give you a new ability, which diverts and diverges what your character can be from A to B, from levels 1 to 20. And this gives divergence. The class gives a lot of differences. You can spread out and create a lot of different characters from openness. If you choose something like Cyborg and Morkborg, where if you choose to have no classes, your abilities are just based on equipment, the scrolls they find, and that's it, really. The stuff you find, maybe. That might be the thing that differentiates your character, and of course, your stats. But you feel a bit more open, you feel a bit more like, I can do anything. Something like Knave doesn't have classes. It just has your equipment that you start with, which gives you a general gist of who your character is. There's no classes. You're just an adventurer, some pleb, really. You're not supposed to be like powerful, but you're an adventurer who doesn't have a class, and this is fine. These are great games that have classes systems, and in some cases, they're even more simple. Something like Tiny Dungeon, for example. That doesn't have classes. You just pick 3, I forget what they call, like features, abilities, like something like that, and you combine them, and that's your character. There's no classes. The art for the ancestry shows people in big suits of armor. Some people look like rogues, some people look like bards, but no one has a class. They have ways to focus in on certain things like spells and monkey sort of fight styles. I say monkey, I mean like monk-like, I guess, not monkey fight styles. But we have class and classless. More direct, more focused, more you can attach a personality, because this is the barbarian. This is what they are. And classless systems, I can be whoever I want to be. I don't have to be just a barbarian. I can create any character I want. I can have spells in one hand and weapons in the other one. I can have a shield in this hand and some sort of monk open hand ability with this hand. Like, you can create whatever character you want. So class versus classless, there is benefits to both. And another thing that is like contained in both when it comes to this discussion is the question of, yes, we have personality. Yes, we have focused design. But there's another thing we have to consider in any game, and that is, does the game let you realize a specific fantasy? And that is the core of all this design. It's not a case of just limited to fantasy. When I say fantasy, I don't mean spells and dragons. I mean the fantasy of playing this character. It can be sci-fi. Does the fantasy of playing this kind of renegade operator, Han Solo sort of person, does that come through in the design? And you have to kind of match the design, and hopefully, does that match the feel of the class? And I was recently having a discussion with one of the peoples involved with the Nimble team. If you're watching this video, hello. We had a great discussion regarding design, the TTRPG community, YouTube. It was all an absolute blast. Thank you. You were like, I feel like I've talked your ear off. It was absolutely fantastic. It was great to have a conversation like that. But again, I spoke to someone in the Nimble team who we had a discussion about classes. And don't worry, I'm not going to start spoiling all the classes. I'm going to talk about specifically something that was in the free preview of the game design stuff, and that was the cheat. The class called the cheat, and the rest of the classes aren't called the, or the. There's no like the on the other ones. It's just the cheat with this one, which is fantastic. I love that difference. It's really funny. And also the class is quite interesting, because if I say the cheat, what's your thought? What is that? If you haven't read the free preview, what is the cheat? Well, when you look at the art, it looks a lot like a rogue. And when you look at the abilities, oh look, this one has sneak attack. This one's the sort of rogue-like character, the sneaky guy, the one that can stab, attack less, but really hit that hard with their damage. Well, okay, so we have something like the cheat. What is the fantasy? Well, it's the fantasy of being the sneaky person in the party, the one that is incredibly skilled, the one that not only is a skill monkey, but can just change the roles. They can bend the rules of the game. They can bend the results of the dice so that you can be a successful skill monkey. And you can sneak, you can be an expert. And how more evident to explore the idea of being an expert in the party than when you want to succeed, you succeed. You succeed in your roles because you're an expert. Perfect. That's right on theme. Also, you get sneak attack. That means you're a deadly sort of backstabbing assassin. Perfect. All these things match up to give the core fantasy of being a skill monkey, sneaky person, or, you know, the rogue or the operator, that kind of feel of a class. It's perfect. It fits the design really well. I'm not going to then counterpoint with a class I think is bad, because really, off the top of my head, I can't think of one that doesn't fit a fantasy. Oh wait, the Ranger. We're getting back to the Ranger. So this discussion about central fantasy, trying to design towards fitting a central fantasy. What is the fantasy of a Ranger? Why does everyone hate the Ranger so much? Well, as I've said before, I think a big problem with the Ranger is that no one can pin them down. If you say to someone who isn't a fan of D&D or hasn't played D&D, who hasn't watched tabletop role-playing games, anything like that, and they say, hey, if I was to say the word Ranger, what would you think? They might think, what, like a park ranger? Someone who works in a national park? Like, well, like, in the military? Like a ranger there? No? I have no idea. Oh, I've watched Lord of the Rings, like, Aragorn? I guess. What is a ranger? A barbarian is a meat tank who is furious, who when you think of a barbarian, you think of someone who's like, almost like primal, and they're a berserker, they run in, start like slashing stuff up, they're angry. When you think of a rogue, a fighter, a warrior in this sort of class, a paladin, a devout follower, a cleric, someone who's a devout follower of their god, a druid, obviously a green priest of some kind. When you look at all these, what else is there? Wizard. Who doesn't know what a wizard is? Casting spells, sorcerer. Casting spells, also a warlock. Oh, okay. Well, isn't that kind of like a wizard, but just like, sort of like a dark wizard? Yeah, pretty much, except for their charisma caster for some reason, despite their obsession with dark law, which you think would be intelligence. Let's not dwell. So, we have the core fantasies, but then we get to the Ranger. You're not Aragorn, or are you? You can do survival, but if the rogue, with their expertise, chooses survival, and has a high wisdom, they can be better at survival than the Ranger, and as we know from the new books, if you look at what each class likes, Rangers love surviving, meanwhile the other classes hate surviving, they want to die. But the Ranger really likes survival, so, that's odd. I can be a survival guy, but the rogue can have a higher survival stat than me? Oh well, okay. So, what have I got to help me along that the rogue doesn't have apart from his skills? What do I have? I have stuff like Natural Explorer. Okay? So this makes me a survivalist. It makes me someone I'm adept at traversing the terrains of the world. But only some of them. Because it'd be weird if I was just a completely worldly hiker who's adept at every single sort of terrain. I can go from a desert to the tundras and be absolutely fine. Okay, so I have a specific number of ways I can explore. Is this invoking the fantasy of a survivalist? Maybe. I think, yeah, it seems pretty key. I'm very good at surviving in the wilderness. I'm very good at hiking. I'm very good at making my way from A to B. Perfect. If I'm in the party, you're going to get there safe. Does that feel fitting for a combat fantasy game? Well, when you have an ability called Smite and Sneak Attack next to Natural Explorer and Favoured Enemy, and how the design actually lets you use those abilities that are called that, it doesn't feel as fitting, does it? It feels like the rogue can destroy someone with a sneak attack, the paladin can destroy someone with a smite, and the rage is sat there with a d6 from Hunter's Mark. So what is a ranger? And no one can really answer this. And because there's so many arguments online about talking about how to fix the ranger, not even arguments, people saying that the ranger's bad, how do we fix it? Everyone has a different idea. If you look up all these homebrew sheets of how I would fix the ranger, or just people talking online, everyone has some aligning thoughts, but a lot of different thoughts. Some people think of just completely mashing the Natural Explorer thing together, and yes, I do have complete traversal over all wilderness. If we're travelling, I can go anywhere, and I'll get you there safe. Okay, some people think favorite enemy, you do extra damage, that kind of thing. But the question is, can you break the game if you start giving people extra damage because they're favorite enemies? And what's the limit on favorite enemies? Like a whole type of creatures? What if they don't come up again? What if they still don't come up? What if you ask your dungeon master, hey, what's the main enemy of this sort of place? And they go, oh, okay, well, it's like an undead dungeon. So if you pick undead, you can have a good time. They go, perfect. And then, you do the dungeon, and everyone goes, let's continue this campaign. And you're there with an undead favouring ranger, and you escape the dungeon and go fight goblins. And then go fight hobgoblins. And then go fight humanoid sorcerers. And you're sat there going, well, okay, the undead thing kind of got wasted very quickly. And there's a lot of design that fits, I think, for the ranger, but it doesn't make you powerful or powerful enough alongside the other enemies. And this is kind of a core issue with D&D, but not really a core issue with something like Pathfinder. Something like Pathfinder, rangers are absolute monsters. They can do more damage than rogues. They are horrific in terms of damage, the rangers. And it's just, no one can really centralise an idea of what the ranger is. And to make it even worse, when we talked about trying to focus a fantasy, like what is the fantasy of the ranger, no one can really know. What's become worse because of online videos and stuff is that the personality that people attach to the ranger is a loser. They're not involved in the group. They're lame. So because of that, not only do you have a class that makes people feel like left out because everyone's so much more powerful, which, trust me, in multiple games I've run, I've had a ranger and that person has been like sat around just with their eyes open wide, like, how much damage did you do? How did you do that? What? And like, just, yeah, there are going to be some people out there who think like, well, they're not playing ranger right. I hate that response. I hate the response of you're not playing something right, because it's a class, it's fantasy, it's a game. There's no right way to do it. If there was a right way to do it, then D&D, the publishers would tell you. The publishers would say, this is how you play the game. And at that point, if we're talking about how things are focused, and you want to argue that the game's not focused, what? So there's a right way to play a class that already feels like it's a central fantasy? So there's one way to play, and if you're not, then it's wrong? Yeah, that's why I don't like that response. But, so yeah, people have this central fantasy that the ranger is just the other one, the odd one out, the one we don't like. He's not involved in the group. And alongside this design, that I said, it excludes people from either the high damage or the usefulness in other areas, like all the spells the wizard can cast. They kind of feel left out. And that's why I want to talk about, just quite briefly, hopefully, maybe not, who knows, considering the last video, when I announced, as it was pointed out, as we announced the finale of the video, which was like halfway through the video, let's talk about the design that I've been working on, because one of the key reasons why I probably got even worse of a throat is because I've recently been on holiday. Hold your applause. So, I've recently took a break, which is something I normally don't do. Had a pretty long break, but even though we were away in a different country, while I was chilling between doing stuff like activities, I was designing, because I just like to do that. And I've been designing what I've been talking about in the previous video that I mentioned. Scepter, the classes for Scepter. And it's the fantasy role-playing game, sort of combat and tactics that are involved, but also some rules-like elements and of quite interesting dice design that I've taken a shine to. And in designing the classes, I thought, okay, I want to create the central fantasies. Of course, I'm going to call the classes like the rogue, the berserker, the fighter. These are all core things that we like to attach ourselves to. Some of them are well-known names. Some people, if you start calling them stuff like the warrior, then it's a question of, okay, we have a fighter and a warrior. Are they the same? Or is the warrior made for melee combat? You know what I mean? Like, so you try to create the most fitting names, and, you can go different with them, and then you start to lose people if they can't immediately from a title guess what this class is. So, with that being said, I thought, okay, all the different classes that we're used to, and of course the ones I want to include that are different. For example, the Guardian, which is just the guy that's focused on being the tank. Not the Barbarian isn't even the focus of being the tank, really. They're focused on being the raging guy that runs in and just can't be killed. And they get more powerful as they take more damage. The Guardian's more defense. There are classes like the Summoner, which is wholly based on the idea that you can summon minions, and minions are a specific thing in the game. They have 1 hit point. They normally do 1 damage, unless they are harder minions. Then every single time they hit, they deal a flat 1, 2, 3, or 4 damage. And if there's a group of them, that's a horrific amount of damage. But the whole class is built around you being able to summon minions every turn with your dice and use them as like little minions, like run in and start attacking people, swarming them, because minions have abilities that they use if they're in packs around people. So it's quite interesting to have this guy. And then, almost kind of similar, because I'm not going to go through every single class that I haven't mentioned yet. There are some that are expected and some that aren't expected, and I think the ones that aren't expected are very interesting still, like the Dancer, for example. But then came the time to go, okay, the Ranger. Do I even try to mimic or like create a better version of the Ranger? Do I even try to go for this fantasy of being a survivalist as a core mechanic? And the answer is, kind of. I've not called it the Ranger. Instead, I think the more core fantasy with a Ranger, the people that people really wish would be the optimum choice, because they really like the idea of having this, is the Beastmaster. People love when they saw there was a Beastmaster subclass. They're like, oh my god, I want this. I love it so much. I have a pet. My whole class subclass thing is based on having a pet. Excellent. So, the whole class is based on having a pet. It's you and your companion, and it's called the Wrangler. And a part of that, you can choose your subclass to be the Ranger. The Ranger has spells, they're good in survival. There's a bunch of other things that let you just traverse the world and you're absolutely fine. You can speak to beasts and just, they know what you're talking about. You can speak fluently to some creatures that just aren't humanoids. It's all focused around you being like this wild-souled person who can connect to the world around you, and as a result, you can traverse it better. Some subclasses can dominate it better, some of them can work alongside your companion better, and some are, of course, more connected to the magic of the world, and as a result, the Ranger speciality. And so, instead of the Ranger, I thought the more central fantasy to focus on is having a companion, being a nature explorer, being a nature, that you're more connected with nature. So not a druid, but you literally have a pet. People really like having pets, so let's have a class based around having a pet as a central mechanic, with things like survival included in there. And this allows for you guys to feel like you're playing a character who is in touch with nature. You can traverse it, but you don't have abilities that are just when in survival, when in the wilderness, but not in combat, I'm good, when everyone else is kicking people down left and right in combat. So, I like this sort of direction with the Wrangler. And another thing as well, just to throw it in there, the companion doesn't have like a stat block or anything, nothing like that. It's just like a list of a list of a list of like details about it. It has a number of health, it doesn't really have any armor, anything like that. It gets better as you get better, as you level up. As it levels up, it gets more health. It has abilities that you can give it. Like, it's not a thing where it's like a fixed idea and you choose, is it a flying one, is it a swimming one, or is it a big meaty land boy? Instead, it's just this sort of central amount of hit points and armor and stuff, and you start to like feed it abilities. At level 1, you can give it one of these companion traits, and they are things like it's larger, it's faster, it's able to reel people in with its attacks, that kind of thing. It has these different attacks that it can do, different abilities that it can do, and I thought, okay, well, you're a Wrangler. Is the fantasy of the class going to be that you can have, like, an animal companion? It's a cool idea, like the Beastmaster. What if it was more than that, though? It's a fantasy game. What if it was more than just animals? Like, monsters. Not only monsters, what about fairy-like beings? What about dragons? Who wants, like, what's it called? Who wants to trade that? No. How to Train Your Dragon. Not Who Wants to Train Their Dragon. How to Train Your Dragon. Different fantasies of having a pet or a friend with you, a companion, that is a different kind of being entirely. For some reason, you have a connection. I mean, one of them, like, all of the types of companions that you can get, they are linked to the different types of entities in the game. Apart from humanoids, you can't just have, like, I'm a Wrangler, and this is my pet human. You don't do that. Instead, you have different entity types as your companion. One of them is giant. You can have just a troll. If you want to flavor it as a troll, you can have a troll by your side. You could have a giant by your side. And it wouldn't be a colossal creature. It would be listed as like it has a size of large. And depending on your choice of what the entity is, it isn't just like a cosmetic thing. It actually has an ability that is linked to what the entities kind of have in the stat blocks themselves, like the enemies that you fight. For example, the monster, if you choose the monster entity type for your companion, it does more damage and it hits harder. It gets a boon on its attack rolls when it's wounded. So when it gets more wounded, it starts to attack more. Oh no, sorry, that's the beast. So like it's the animal version. As it gets more wounded, it hits harder. Meanwhile, the monster is more like devilish and ferocious, and as a result, when its prey becomes wounded, that's when it starts to hit harder. And I think this is quite fun. You can sort of combine these elements together, and when it dies, you can choose: does it die or does it just run away? Because that was another issue with the Beastmaster subclass, is that like I have this pet wolf, and then we get to level 14 and it dies in one combat. So it was horrible. And you would constantly just rinse and repeat through all these corpses of your pets as you go down the line. So it's not a class filled with heartbreak. Your companion is linked to you for some reason, and you can keep it out of danger or let it pass on in a fight in a dramatic moment if you'd like, and pick a new companion to continue with, because it is a core part of the class. And this is, I feel like, a good replacement for the fantasy of what is the ranger. So that is what I've been designing with the classes. Again, trying to make them different, unique, trying to make it integrate with the mechanics so that it feels like you're playing this thing. And when you're designing classes yourselves, because I know that a bunch of people in my videos in the past, on the previous video, anytime I talk about design, even homebrew rules in D&D, they're all talking about, I'm making my own game, and that's fantastic. Keep doing it. Keep working on it. You can do this. You can get it out there, even if it's on like Drive-Thru-RPG and what have you. Get it out there. Keep designing and do what you love. You will get there. It'll be fantastic, I promise. And that's the thing to consider if you have a class-based game, and that's not always the go-to. It was my go-to when I first started because, people like this game, but I went with other things, and I went back to classes. You might not make that choice, you might go different directions. It's entirely up to you. But if you're working on classes, if you're working on any part of a game, weapons, features, magic items, anything like that, space stations, whatever it is, spaceships, whatever you're designing, try to draw first upon what is the fantasy we're trying to invoke. Board games do it, games do it, video games. TTRPGs are exactly the same. What fantasy are you trying to invoke? Focus on that. Try to make the mechanics relate this and make this possible. And then, once you have the central fantasy in mind, that's when you can start designing and really try to key in on those main parts. What makes this thing unique? What makes it very interesting amongst the party because of the mechanics? And as a result, what personality might people give it? What personality might people draw towards it? The Wrangler would probably be someone who, they're in love with their pets, maybe to an annoying degree. Whenever there's a pet in the room, they start to go over and pet it on the head, as opposed to socialising with people. The Summoner might be someone who you might give the personality of someone who's incredibly lonely, because they have magic based around just summoning their own friends and then pretending that they like them, but they're just staring at a bunch of zombies stood there. That kind of thing. So you have to think about what the fantasy is, what people want, what people will feel when they do it, because you might focus on mechanics and just go, okay, this works, but will people like it? And that's what playtesting is for. Do people like what you've created? Do they feel it invokes the fantasy? Does it feel like there's something missing? That kind of thing. So, as you're designing, as you're thinking about things you can do and what to make, consider the main fantasy. And if I was to try and estimate how many times I've said that word this whole video, it'd definitely be double digits, but horrendous. So I'm going to stop talking about fantasy in classes now, and hopefully that's been a nice little chill chat with all of you, and I'm going to leave you there, talking about classes, the design, and if you're doing class-based design, think about fantasy. If you're doing classless design for your games, that's absolutely fine. In fact, some people are going to love that. People like the customization, people like how it's more open, and if the game itself has the fantasy that you're going for, the setting that you're going for, sci-fi, modern day, kids on bikes, that kind of thing, then it should all come together. People will buy your game, people will go for your game if it's classless, some people will go for your game if it has classes, and it will suit them if they like those two things. So, with that being said, your design journey, I'll be with you along the way. Hopefully this video has been fun, hopefully this video has been interesting, or you can relate to it in some way. And of course, leave in the comments if you have any thoughts on this, if you have any worries that you'd like to sort of like voice. Maybe I can give my opinion on it, maybe relate what I think as the best I can do, as all YouTube comments do. Just here's what I think. Be damned if it's level-headed or not. But I'll leave you there. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.